The courtroom in the small coastal town of Harborview was steeped in a heavy, oppressive silence, the kind that seemed to cling to the walls and make every breath feel deliberate. Every seat was occupied, the air thick with anticipation as the crowd's eyes were fixed on the man at the center of the room. Captain Daniel Hayes sat in his wheelchair, his weathered Coast Guard uniform adorned with service ribbons that caught the dim glow of the overhead lights. His hand rested firmly on the leash of his loyal companion, a Belgian Malinois named Storm, whose sharp eyes scanned the room with quiet vigilance. To the onlookers, Storm was just another working dog, but to Daniel she was a lifeline, a partner who had pulled him through the darkest moments of his life. Daniel's jaw clenched as the judge, a stern woman with graying hair, addressed him. Her voice was measured but carried the weight of finality. "Captain Hayes, this is your opportunity to make your case. The Coast Guard has deemed Storm government property to be reassigned to active duty. Speak now, or the decision will stand." The words hit Daniel like a rogue wave. After years of serving together, facing storms at sea, rescuing stranded sailors, and navigating treacherous waters, the idea of losing Storm now felt like a betrayal of everything they'd fought for. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted his grip on the leash, his voice rough with emotion as he began to speak. "Your Honor, Storm isn't just a tool or a piece of equipment. She's saved my life more times than I can count. She's dragged me through freezing waters, alerted me to sinking vessels before radar could pick them up. And when I came back from my last mission, broken and lost, she gave me a reason to keep going. She's not just a dog, she's my family." The room was still, the air heavy with unspoken empathy. Some spectators shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others whispered softly, their faces a mix of compassion and disbelief. The judge's expression remained unreadable, her eyes studying Daniel for a long moment before she leaned forward, preparing to deliver her ruling. But before she could speak, Storm let out a low, guttural growl, her body tensing as she rose to her feet. The leash slipped slightly in Daniel's hand as Storm's ears flicked toward the back of the courtroom, her gaze locked on something unseen. A murmur rippled through the crowd, and the bailiff, a tall man named Jenkins, with a skeptical frown, stepped forward instinctively. "Captain Hayes, control your dog," he said, his tone sharp but uncertain. Storm's growl deepened, her body rigid, her focus unwavering. Daniel's heart began to race. He'd seen this behavior before, countless times during rescue missions when Storm sensed danger no one else could detect. "Your Honor," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the knot forming in his chest, "Storm doesn't act like this for no reason. She's trained to sense threats, leaks, fires, people in distress. If she's growling, something's wrong." The judge hesitated, her gavel hovering in midair. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of confusion and unease. Jenkins exchanged a glance with his partner, a shorter bailiff named Carter, who gripped his flashlight tightly. "It's just a dog," Carter muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. He took a cautious step toward the double doors at the back of the courtroom, where Storm's attention was fixed. The silence shattered as Storm barked sharply, the sound echoing off the polished wooden walls like a warning shot. Her body strained against the leash, her claws scraping the floor as she lunged toward the doors. Daniel tightened his grip, his voice rising. "Storm, easy!" But deep down, he knew this wasn't random. Storm was alerting them to something dangerous. The judge's composure faltered, her eyes darting between Storm and the doors. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice betraying a hint of fear. The crowd was on edge now, some rising from their seats, others clutching their belongings as if preparing to flee. Jenkins raised a hand, signaling for calm, but his own movements were tense, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. "Storm, what is it?" Daniel whispered, his pulse thundering in his ears. He wheeled himself forward slightly, his eyes following Storm's line of sight. The dog's growls grew louder, more insistent, her body low to the ground as if preparing to pounce. The air felt charged, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Then a sharp metallic clank echoed from beyond the doors, a sound so out of place it sent a chill through the room. The crowd gasped, and Carter stumbled back, his flashlight beam shaking as it illuminated the hallway beyond. "What the hell was that?" he muttered, his voice barely audible. Daniel's stomach twisted. He'd heard sounds like that before, on sinking ships and collapsing structures, moments before disaster struck. "Your Honor," he said, his voice cutting through the rising panic, "we need to evacuate. Now Storm's never wrong." The judge hesitated, her eyes wide as she looked from Daniel to the doors. Jenkins took a cautious step into the hallway, his hand on his weapon. "There's nothing out here," he called back, but his voice wavered, betraying his uncertainty. The hallway was dark, the shadows stretching long and ominous in the flashlight's beam. Storm's barking grew frantic, her body straining so hard against the leash that Daniel had to brace himself to keep her in place. "Something's coming," he said, his voice trembling with urgency. "We need to move." Before anyone could respond, another metallic clank rang out, louder this time, closer. The crowd erupted into chaos, people shoving toward the exits as the bailiff shouted for order. The judge slammed her gavel, but the sound was drowned out by the growing panic. Storm lunged again, her barks turning into snarls, her teeth bared as she stared into the darkness of the hallway. And then from the shadows a figure emerged. He moved slowly, deliberately, his heavy boots clicking against the tiled floor. His face was obscured by a dark cap pulled low, his hands tucked into the pockets of a worn leather jacket. The air seemed to grow colder as he stepped into the light, his presence radiating an unsettling calm. Storm's snarls intensified, her body trembling with the urge to charge. "Who are you?" Jenkins demanded, his gun now drawn and aimed at the stranger. Carter's flashlight beam locked onto the man, but the light only seemed to make the shadows around him deeper. The man tilted his head, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Relax," he said, his voice low and smooth, almost too calm for the chaos he'd sparked. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." But Daniel wasn't convinced. Storm's reaction told him everything he needed to know. This man was dangerous. "What do you want?" Daniel called out, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. The stranger's eyes flicked toward Storm, his smirk widening. "That dog," he said simply, his tone carrying an eerie certainty. "She's special, and she's coming with me." Daniel's grip on the leash tightened, his heart pounding. "You're not taking her," he said, his voice low but firm. "She's mine." The stranger's smirk didn't falter, but his eyes darkened, a glint of something sinister flashing in them. "You don't understand, Captain Hayes," he said, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "This isn't just about the dog. It's about what she knows, what she can do." The crowd was in full panic now, some shoving toward the exits while others froze, transfixed by the unfolding drama. The judge shouted for order, but her voice was lost in the chaos. Jenkins took a step closer to the stranger, his gun still raised. "Step back now," he ordered, but the man didn't move. Instead, he reached into his pocket, his movements slow and deliberate. The bailiffs tensed, their weapons trained on him. "Hands where I can see them," Carter shouted, his voice cracking with nerves. The stranger's hand emerged, holding a small metallic object. The crowd gasped, and Daniel's heart skipped a beat. But as the flashlight beam caught it, the object gleamed. A key, nothing more. Yet Storm's barking didn't stop, her focus locked on the man as if the key were a lie, a distraction. "Relax," the stranger said again, his voice almost mocking now. He turned the key in his hand, and with a sharp click, the lights in the courtroom flickered. For a moment, darkness swallowed the room, and the air filled with screams and the scrape of chairs. When the lights snapped back on, the stranger wasn't alone. Two more figures stood behind him, their faces obscured by hoods, their postures mirroring his unsettling calm. Each held something in their hands, sharp, metallic objects that glinted in the light. Weapons. The crowd's panic reached a fever pitch, people shoving and shouting as they scrambled for the exits. Daniel's heart raced as he looked at Storm, who was now snarling so fiercely it seemed she might break free. "You're not taking her," he repeated, his voice shaking with defiance. "I don't care who you are or what you want. She stays with me." The stranger's smirk faded, his eyes narrowing as he studied Daniel. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, his tone cold and calculated. "But you'll see soon enough. This isn't over." He took a step back, motioning for his companions to follow. The tension in the room was unbearable. every second stretching into an eternity. Storm's growls didn't falter, her body still poised to strike. The judge, her face pale, slammed her gavel one final time. "This court is adjourned," she shouted, her voice barely audible over the chaos. As the strangers retreated into the hallway, the crowd began to disperse, their whispers a mix of fear and confusion. Daniel remained where he was, his hand resting on Storm's head as she finally sat, her growls fading to a low rumble. "Good girl," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You did good." But the relief was fleeting. Daniel's mind raced as he replayed the stranger's words. This wasn't just about Storm, it was about something bigger, something he didn't yet understand. As the courtroom emptied, he wheeled himself toward the judge's bench, determined to get answers. The bailiffs were already on their radios, calling for backup, their faces tight with unease. "Your Honor," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. "Those men, they weren't here by accident. They knew about Storm. They knew what she can do." The judge looked at him, her expression a mix of exhaustion and fear. "Captain Hayes," she said softly, "I don't know what just happened, but I'll make sure it's investigated. For now, take Storm and go home. We'll reconvene when it's safe." Daniel nodded, though his mind was far from settled. As he wheeled himself out of the courtroom, Storm walking faithfully at his side, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The strangers would be back, he was certain of it, but whatever they wanted, they'd have to go through him to get to Storm. Over the next few days, Harborview buzzed with rumors about the courtroom incident. Some said the strangers were part of a criminal syndicate. Others whispered about government conspiracies. Daniel kept to himself, staying in his small seaside cottage with Storm always nearby. He couldn't stop thinking about the stranger's words. What did Storm know? What could she do that made her so valuable? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Daniel sat on his porch, Storm resting at his feet. The ocean's waves crashed rhythmically in the distance, a sound that had always calmed him. But tonight it felt different, ominous, as if the sea itself were whispering warnings. Storm's ears perked up suddenly, her body tensing as she stared into the darkness beyond the porch. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "What is it, girl?" he asked, his hand reaching for the flashlight he kept nearby. Before he could move, a figure stepped into the light of the porch. A woman this time, her face sharp and angular, her eyes cold but curious. She wore a dark coat, her hands visible and empty, but Daniel's instincts screamed danger. "Captain Hayes," she said, her voice smooth and measured. "I'm not here to fight. I just want to talk." Storm growled low, her body rigid, but she didn't lunge. Daniel tightened his grip on the flashlight, his other hand resting on Storm's collar. "You've got 5 seconds to tell me who you are and what you want," he said, his voice steady. The woman smiled faintly, unfazed by Storm's growls. "My name is Elena," she said, "and I'm here to offer you a deal. Give us the dog, and we'll make sure you're taken care of. Money, protection, whatever you need." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Storm's not for sale," he said, his voice like steel. "And if you're with those men from the courtroom, you already know my answer." Elena's smile didn't waver, but her eyes darkened. "You don't understand what's at stake," she said. "Storm isn't just a dog. She's been trained for something extraordinary, something that could change everything. You're standing in the way of progress, Captain." Daniel leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "I don't care what you think she's worth. She's my partner, and I'm not letting her go." Elena studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well," she said, "but you'll regret this. We'll be back." She turned and disappeared into the darkness, her footsteps fading into the sound of the waves. Storm's growls softened, but her eyes remained fixed on the spot where Elena had stood. Daniel's heart pounded as he reached down to stroke her fur. "Good girl," he whispered. "We'll figure this out." The next morning, Daniel contacted an old friend from the Coast Guard, Lieutenant Marcus Reed, who had connections in military intelligence. Over coffee at a small diner on the edge of Harborview, Daniel recounted the courtroom incident and the encounter with Elena. Marcus listened intently, his brow furrowed. "Sounds like they're after something specific," Marcus said, stirring his coffee. Storm's training records might give us a clue. She was part of a special program, wasn't she? Daniel nodded. Experimental detection training. She was taught to sense things beyond the usual. Chemical leaks, electromagnetic signals, even sabotage. But the program was classified. I didn't think anyone outside the Coast Guard knew about it. Marcus leaned forward, his voice low. If someone's targeting her, they know more than they should. I'll dig into it, see what I can find. In the meantime, keep her close. Over the next week, Daniel and Storm stayed vigilant. He reinforced the locks on his cottage, installed motion sensor lights, and kept a loaded pistol in the drawer by his bed. Storm never left his side, her senses sharper than ever. But the quiet was unnerving, like the calm before a storm. One night, as a fog rolled in from the sea, Daniel woke to the sound of Storm growling low in her throat. He grabbed his flashlight and pistol, his heart racing as he wheeled himself to the window. The motion sensor lights were on, casting an eerie glow through the fog. And then he saw them, 3 figures moving silently across his lawn, their shapes barely discernible in the mist. "Storm, stay," he whispered, his voice steady despite the fear gripping him. He reached for his phone to call Marcus, but before he could dial, the front door rattled. Someone was trying to get in. Storm's growls turned into barks, loud and ferocious, echoing through the small cottage. Daniel wheeled himself to the door, his pistol raised. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice cutting through the night. No answer. The door rattled again, harder this time. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears as he braced himself. "Storm, ready," he said, releasing her leash. The door burst open, and 2 men rushed in, their faces obscured by masks. Storm lunged, her teeth sinking into the arm of the first man, who cried out in pain. Daniel fired a warning shot into the ceiling, the sound deafening in the small space. "Get out!" he roared. The second man hesitated, then grabbed his injured partner and dragged him back into the fog. The third figure, still outside, shouted something unintelligible before all 3 disappeared into the night. Storm stood at the threshold, her barks echoing into the darkness. Daniel's hands shook as he lowered the pistol, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He reached for Storm, pulling her close. "You're okay," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "We're okay." The police arrived within minutes, followed by Marcus, who had been alerted by a neighbor. The intruders had left no trace, but Marcus's face was grim as he sat with Daniel in the cottage. "This is bigger than we thought," he said. "I found something in the records. Storm's training wasn't just about detection, it was about a prototype technology, a sensor implant that lets her detect things no human or machine can. Someone wants that tech, and they're willing to kill for it." Daniel's blood ran cold. "They're not getting her," he said, his voice firm. "I don't care what it takes." Marcus nodded. "We'll get you protection, and I'm calling in some favors. We're going to find out who these people are and stop them." Over the next few days, Daniel and Storm were moved to a safe house on the outskirts of Harborview, guarded by armed security. Marcus worked tirelessly, tracking leads that pointed to a shadowy organization with ties to private military contractors. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became that Storm's abilities were part of a larger plan. A plan to control advanced surveillance technology that could shift the balance of power. But Daniel wasn't alone. The people of Harborview, inspired by his story and Storm's bravery, rallied around him. Petitions circulated to keep Storm with him, and local news outlets ran stories about their bond. The courtroom incident had sparked a movement, and Daniel found himself at the center of a community determined to protect one of their own. One evening, as Daniel and Storm sat in the safe house, Marcus arrived with news. "We've got them," he said, his voice triumphant. "The organization behind this, they've been exposed. Arrests are being made as we speak. Storm's safe, and so are you." Daniel exhaled, the weight of weeks of fear lifting from his shoulders. He looked at Storm, who rested her head on his knee, her eyes calm for the first time in days. "We did it, girl," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We're free." The next day, the judge officially ruled in Daniel's favor, declaring Storm his rightful companion and barring any further attempts to reassign her. The courtroom erupted in cheers, and Daniel felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. He and Storm had faced the storm together, and they'd come out stronger. As they left the courthouse, The sun shining brightly over Harborview, Daniel looked down at Storm, her tail wagging gently. "Let's go home," he said, a smile breaking across his face. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they'd face them together, their bond unbreakable. And so, in the quiet coastal town of Harborview, a man and his dog proved that loyalty and courage could overcome even the darkest threats. Their story became a legend, a testament to the power of trust and the strength of a bond that no one could tear apart.